400 candles. That was the number. Not a suggestion, not a goal, a requirement. 400 individual sticks of light to survive a single winter. It took 48 hours of near continuous labor. 2 days where the kitchen ceased to be a home and became a factory of fat. If you stopped, if you failed to dip enough, you didn't just lose time. You lost the ability to see your children's faces after 5 in the afternoon for 3 months straight. It was a physical war waged by the back, the arms, and the lungs against the coming darkness. And the weapon was sweat. My back would scream by the 100th dip, but you couldn't stop. If the tallow cools, it lumps. If it gets too hot, it melts what you've already built. You become a machine. Dip, cool, until your hands smell like dead sheep and your eyes sting from the smoke. We didn't buy light, we bled for it. To understand the darkness of the 19th century, you have to understand Sarah. Born in 1839, she grew up in a world that effectively ended when the sun went down. Today, we flip a switch and banish the night. For Sarah, living in rural Ohio, the night was a physical weight. It was an ocean that swallowed the farm every evening. And the only way to push that ocean back was the killing time. Late autumn, the time of slaughter. The cattle and the sheep were butchered in November. That's when the work truly began. You see, nothing was wasted. The meat filled the larder. The hide made our boots. But the fat, the hard interior fat from around the kidneys of the sheep, that was gold. We didn't see gore. We saw light trapped in the sweet. We saw the only thing standing between us and a winter of blackness. It is a chemistry forgotten by the modern world. You cannot simply light a piece of fat on fire. It must be rendered, purified. Sarah, at 15 years old, was already a master of this alchemy. The ratio had to be precise. Too much hog lard, and then the candles would smoke and stink of burning pork, choking the house. Too much beef tallow, and they would burn dim. The secret, the standard of excellence, was sheep's tallow, or, if you were lucky, a mix. We chopped the sweet fine, mountains of it. It was greasy work. The dog would sit by my feet, whining for a scrap, but every ounce of that fat was precious. We needed 6 to 8 pounds of fat just to make enough candles for a few weeks. Do the math. When we needed hundreds of pounds of raw sweet for the winter stash, it was heavy, it was slick, and it was the beginning of the big try. Then came the smell. If you ask anyone born before 1860 what the defining scent of domestic life was, they wouldn't say baked bread or pine needles. They would say rendering. As the fat melted in the great iron kettle over the hearth, it released a heavy, cloying odor. It permeated the curtains, the clothes, the hair. It was the smell of survival, but it was thick enough to chew on. You had to skim the cracklings, the bits of membrane and meat that fried up to the surface. If you left them in, the candle would sputter and pop. We strained that liquid gold through cheesecloth. It had to be pure. Watching it clarify was the only peaceful moment, because once that tallow was ready, the dipping began. And once the dipping starts, there is no rest. Before a single drop of wax could be applied, the skeleton of the candle had to be built. On the wicks, this wasn't store-bought string. This was spun cotton, loosely twisted. If the twist was too tight, the flame would be small. Too loose, and it would burn away too fast. Sarah would spend the evening prior cutting lengths of cotton, tying them onto long wooden rods called brooches, 6 wicks to a rod. It was delicate work for rough hands. We'd space them out just so. If they touched, they'd stick together later, and you'd ruin 2 candles trying to pull them apart. Everything had to be straight. A crooked wick meant a crooked candle, and a crooked candle drips hot grease onto the family Bible. My mother was strict about the wicks. Straight as a church spire, she'd say. Dawn breaks on dipping day. The kitchen is cold, purposely. You need cold air to harden the hot fat instantly. Sarah arranges 2 long poles across the backs of chairs like a railway track. The brooches, laden with their cotton wicks, are laid across them, and the kettle of melted tallow sits in the middle. The process is deceptively simple. Dip, lift, drain, cool. The first dip is the hardest. The cotton is light. It wants to float on top of the grease. You have to push it down gently, let it drink the tallow, then pull it up. They look like nothing at first, just greasy strings. But that's the foundation. You do 1 rod, set it down, pick up the next. Well, by the time you reach the end of the line, maybe 40 rods later, the first one is cool enough to dip again. It's a circle, a never-ending circle. There were no thermometers in Sarah's kitchen, no digital readouts. The only gauge she had was her own skin. This was the critical skill. If the tallow was too hot, it would melt off the layer you just applied, undoing an hour's work in a second. If it was too cool, the candle would develop lumps and ridges. You learned to read the fat with your finger. It had to bite but not burn, just hot enough to flow, just cool enough to stick. My fingertips would lose feeling by noon. They'd be coated in a layer of wax, scalded and numb. But you couldn't stop to nurse them. If the pot got too cold, you had to add boiling water underneath to bring the temperature up. It was a dance between fire and ice. Let's talk about the weight. A dipping frame with 6 candles starts light. But as the candles grow, gaining girth with each dip, the weight multiplies. Imagine lifting a rod, holding it steady with outstretched arms, lowering it, holding, lifting, and racking it. Now do that 2,000 times in a day. The shoulders burn. The lower back tightens into a knot. By the 20th dip, the candles are the size of your thumb. They are heavy now. Swinging them too fast makes them touch and stick. You have to be slow, deliberate, despite the pain in your arms. It's a silent torture. Well, my brothers would be outside chopping wood, and they thought they had the hard job. But they could stop and lean on an axe. I couldn't lean. The tallow waits for no one. Night falls outside, but the work inside continues by the light of the fire and, inevitably, a candle. The irony is not lost on them. Burning the previous year's labor to create this year's supply. The candles are now nearly finished. They are tapered, slightly yellow, smelling of the farm. They are warm to the touch, alive with potential energy. The bottom of the candles would always be thicker where the tallow dripped down and hardened. We called that the bell. Before they were fully hard, we had to trim that off, shaping the base so it would fit in a candlestick. It was the final sculpture. Hundreds of them hanging on the racks like strange pale fruit ripening in the kitchen. 400 candles, stored in wooden boxes, kept in the coolest part of the cellar to prevent them from softening in the summer heat. This box wasn't just storage, it was a bank vault. It represented hours of reading the Bible, hours of mending clothes after dark, hours of seeing the faces of loved ones across the dinner table. It was civilization, preserved in animal fat. When the last rod was racked, the silence in the kitchen was profound. My arms would tremble for hours afterwards. But looking at that pile, it felt like we were rich. We had conquered the winter. We had made time itself. But the world was turning. While Sarah dipped her wicks in Ohio, a man named Edwin Drake was drilling a hole in the ground in Titusville, Pennsylvania. In 1859, he struck oil, rock oil, petroleum, and from that black sludge came a clear, thin fluid that would change the smell of the night forever. Kerosene. I remember the first time Father brought a tin of it home. It was around 1861. He brought a glass lamp with a chimney. We were suspicious. We'd heard stories of it exploding, but then he lit it. The difference was violent. A tallow candle gives off about 12 lumens of light, a soft, warm, pitiful glow that struggles against the shadows. A kerosene lamp. It pushed back the dark with a steady, white brilliance. It was 10 times brighter. And it didn't smell of rotting sheep. It smelled of industry. It smelled of the future. It was like the sun had come indoors. I looked at my hands, scarred from years of hot tallow, and then at that clear liquid in the glass lamp. In that instant, I knew the ritual was over. The dipping days were dead. We didn't need to save fat anymore. We didn't need to stand for 48 hours. We just needed a few pennies to buy the oil. Progress is a thief. It gives us convenience, but it steals our competence. When the kerosene arrived, the great dipping of autumn stopped. The kitchen no longer smelled of rendering fat, and the backs of the women no longer ached from the dipping frames. But something else vanished, too. The connection between the animal in the field and the light on the table was severed. We gained time, yes, but we lost the feeling of making our own light. When you buy light, you take it for granted. You leave the lamp burning when you leave the room. When you make it with your own sweat, you value every flickering second. You respect the dark because you know exactly what it costs to fight it. Sarah lived to see the turn of the century. She saw kerosene give way to gas, and gas give way to the miracle of the electric bulb. She lived to see a world where light was as cheap as water. She never dipped another candle after 1865. The wooden rods were burned for kindling. The iron kettle was used for boiling laundry. My grandchildren don't believe me when I tell them about the smell. They think light comes from a wire in the wall. They don't know that light used to be heavy. And they don't know that night used to have a texture, greasy and thick. They are lucky. But sometimes I miss the quiet of the dipping, the rhythm of it. We are the children of the electric age, bathed in perpetual sterile brightness. But deep in our history, in the muscle memory of our ancestors, there is still the ache of the dipping frame. There is still the memory of a time when we had to make the sun ourselves, one dip at a time. And the night smelled of survival, and it was beautiful.